So, this month's madness is Rebellion from Devil May Cry. I have made this sword before. I might throw a little bit in here of what it looked like that time. But it was so long ago, and I wasn't doing full build videos at the time, because that was when YouTube was still for fun and giggles. So I thought it was worth a revisit. And a couple of other people I know have tried making it as well, so I might throw a couple of links in the comments of other versions of it. But this is going to be my version. I think I'm going to start off with the blade. Normally when I'm marking a blade out, I'd use the printed out template itself, but this blade is unusual in that it's made up of 90% straight lines, and so instead of chopping the template out, I can work it out with just these guys. I can feel the Hardox really doing a number on the hacksaw blade. The reason I'm using a hacksaw blade, these corners, just the cutting disc was not meeting it perfectly, and I didn't want to risk damaging this corner. There we go. So I can clean these inner bits up with a file. Sharpening this inner corner is going to be a nightmare too. I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to do the transition with my angle grinder. I might do it with the angle grinder and then finish it off with the file, and then hope I can hand sand it or something. When I was doing this last time, I wasn't at a level where I'd worry about niceties like that. Here we see the shape of the sword traced out in bubbles from the reaction of the vinegar. I haven't seen such a clean outline in a while. I wonder why the outline's so clean. Being exposed to the air, you would have thought that the action of the wind would have... Oh, there you go. I'm not sure why it's such a clean... It's not the sword being on the surface. You see, like if I disturb it, it's below the surface. Cool though. I should really buy a new level. This one is slightly bellied up, so you tell as the thing floating by the same level both sides. Obviously you do an eye test too, just casting your eye down it. And then when the eye test is good, and the eye test is usually more severe than the levels. Like the level will usually be fine, and I'll be dissatisfied with the eye test, and then it gets very hard to adjust. You know, like am I just telling myself stories, or my eyes playing tricks on me? You know? So now I'm going to join this plate to the sword, the base plate for the skull. I think last time I made this, I didn't do this. Let me think, it's late. Why do I want to do this? I want to do this because I can then start joining elements on. Oh, when I clean the sword off, when I actually do the full polish, then I can polish this guy too. Maybe that's why. I don't know. It's late. We're doing this. So trying to film the big weld didn't quite work. I mean, it looked interesting, but I might ask Anthony what his professional opinion of why it looks so crazy. Still though, the weld came out good. It would appear that these guys are pretty good. These little marks, you know, I was using the angle thing here just to make sure that everything was actually coming in. Just these little lines are actually lining up with each other, like on the far side, that there's the same angle on both sides. I mean, not the same angle as each other. These are two different angles, but you know what I mean. They're mirrored properly. This one was only very slightly off being a straight across, so I'm just going to make it a straight across. You can see here where it was just a little bit off compared to the far side, which was a straight across. So I said, screw it, they're both straight acrosses. I'm not standing at the right place because the camera is more or less standing where I was. But this little bit here I couldn't get it with the angle grinder, so that's why I'm doing this bit with the file, which I hardly ever do. I hardly ever finish off a bevel, whatever you call that, the sloped part of the edge. With a file. Supposedly, if you are a young aspiring knife maker, you can get away with doing your first knife with just a hacksaw and files. You know, you buy one of the fancy knife steels, cut out your blank with the hacksaw, and then do everything with just the files. Send it away to someone else to harden and temper. But yeah, I generally don't do this with a file ever, except for, you know, like I said, I couldn't get that with the grinder. Oh, I'm about to run out of batteries on this. So what we're doing here is, this is the hemisphere I'm going to start off with for the skull. Now the problem with the face is, perspective wise, is this is the outline of what I wanted based on the art. But when that's on a skull, it means you have to make the shape much wider. Cut out the original marked things that I thought were vaguely okay. See, it's much wider than you'd expect. Not expect. Think would look right. So this is easier to see the more straight down it is. This guy goes on top, and these things tuck in at the sides, which is kind of like a cylinder, but we don't want a cylinder. We flare out the cheeks and we create like a section out of a wonky cone, and that's kind of what forms the basis of our can I do it on one side? You see, if I pull out one side, you can kind of see that's what forms the basis of our skull. So what we're doing here is I want to use weld to build up kind of some of the features on these guys. But before I do that, I want to use heat to get the curve correct. The curve that the skull has to... Did I turn the gas on? I did turn the gas on. The curve that the... That's fused there now. The curve that the thing has to follow around this guy. I thought, for some reason I thought it was the halfway point, but then I was looking at the actual picture, and it turns out the face starts higher than the actual halfway point. There's a very small forehead. So now I can use heat to bring these down. The key thing is that the cheeks, like I said, it's a section out of a cone, not a cylinder. Each one of these cheeks is sticking out about the same amount on each side. That looks pretty good to me. So what I've done here is built up various areas with weld, so that when I grind back, I can create a more 3D-ish effect. So I was starting to think about the ribs of Rebellion. Like, my original plan A was I was going to bend some big ass rings and then modify the rings to suit the individual ribs. But the more I looked at it, the more I realized it would be better and save time and energy to work out the exact shapes of each rib before I go heating up 3/4 inch steel. A lot of the renders render this guy as a solid rib cage, like with no, like it's a, we really can't see in between the ribs. But the last one I did, you could see in between the ribs, and it looks more, you know, I believe if they had the render power to do individual ribs on the sword when Devil May Cry 2 and 3 came out, they would have. It just looks way cooler when it's like a floating rib cage you can see through. So 3/4 inch solid steel bar. Hang on, which one of these layers? That was the side profile of how they're sloped, which this slope gives us this length, the how long each one of the ribs is when looked at from the side, and then these rings, complicated rings here, were for the looking down through the rib cage. What kind of shape would I like it to make? And then so that was 2 dimensions. This gives us the height. This gives us the length. And then we are left with these 4 little shapes, A, B, C, D, which I've labeled because I don't want to mess them up. And if I cut out these little shapes and bend the 3/4 inch around them, then I can heat up and hopefully with very little waste and messing around have the exact shapes I need to make a rib cage that has all of these dimensions I want. Like I want the bump up to look like this and the side profile to look like this, etc, etc, etc. One down, 15 to go. So what I'm doing here is cutting the rib segments at angles to try and match them up somewhat with the template I drew. I think when I was drawing this one, when I cut this guy out, I actually put it 1/4 inch high. I might have neglected to cut off the base plate because these guys seem to be a little bit low, but that's the idea. It seems like there should be a faster way to cut all of these angles quickly, other than physically marking them and cutting them, but that's what I'm doing. So this is the idea. Tacked here, there's a, can you see the angle is sharpied out underneath, so then you use this guy to make sure that it's actually following the tracing down below, and then this guy is held at the correct height using this bar which has been cut to the 38 millimeters or whatever this one was, and obviously each one is each set of ribs. I'll be able to use this one twice kind of thing. Where's my hat? Now, will this guy come off with a light little tap? No, of course not. Will it come off with an aggressive, ignorant tap? So I've decided the rib cage hangs free. I think in the actual game model, they're all fused together. I said earlier that I wanted to put space in between them because I thought it would look cooler if you could see into the rib cage. But I think I'm going to weld just a little bit in between each rib to connect the ribs to each other. Because that way when I put the rib cage down onto the sword and weld it to the sword around the edges, it'll be much more rigid and more solid. Like if all of these ribs are separate on the sword, it won't do much for structural integrity. But having this 3D lump be like an actual solid contiguous unit, it'll actually add something to the structure instead of endangering it with the heat and the warpage and stuff. I might cut up some little bits. Oh. There we go. I might cut up some little bits because that gap is actually just a little bit too much to fill properly. As you can see though, it's possible. You can fill any gap if you're patient enough. So the addition of the little, do I have a pointer that's not too hot to touch? The addition of a little bridge piece did make this second one much easier to weld. And so then once I've got a nice lump of weld built up, and I can start grinding it back and making it look pretty. So 1, 2, and then the last little one, and that just gives something for the weld to flow onto, makes it much easier. Mostly faster. You know, it's just like when you're building a bridging a gap this big with just weld, you have to go drop, 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 because if you get it too hot too fast, the little bridge you're making will fall. But if you have something for it to fall onto, you can just, you know, it's easier. Sandpaper. This is just cut off a belt. I started off by using the die grinder with the little head, and then this guy, and then got the rest of that joint with the sandpaper on the vice grips. I didn't expect that was a new strip because I just replaced it, but it took off the thing I was aiming for immediately. The rest I can get with just the standard polishing, you know, the interleaf guy. Oh, it's not ideal having to lean. The interleaf flap disc. The two halves of the cage make a very interesting shape put together. I mean, that's the point, that they have an interesting shape. I was just checking that these things actually line up properly, because there was always the chance that my calculations were done wrong, or that stuff had moved and warped with the heat, but nothing seems to have moved too dramatically. So these are ready to be attached to the sword back in front. Clunk. So I'll level with you. I'm not exactly sure what I'm doing here. I mean, I know the ultimate goal, but the ways and means are somewhat elusive. Hidden inside this cylinder is this bone. And the trick is to extract the bone from the cylinder. When I made this before, I made it from loads of separate pieces. So it's debatable whether or not this is better time-wise. Pain-wise, it's probably going to be more physical endurance. But if it's more physical endurance and there's no time saving, then this is dumb. We're starting off by splitting the cylinder into 6 equal spaces. I have the bottom of it broken up into a hexagon, and that's where we're going to start, and we'll see where we go from there. So plan A was to do this piece out of one huge solid piece and just grind it out, but I was looking at it and it's such a huge amount of grinding. What I've decided to do is break it up into 3 bits. I have the ends, chickens and airplanes trying to ruin my audio. The 2 ends, which have to be this big heavy stuff, and then the middle section can be made entirely out of this stock, which is I think it's only one, yeah, it's 1.5 versus 2.5. So hopefully, I was hoping to avoid having to get into welding anything together for these guys, but just removing the 1/2 inch material just through grinding on either side. I don't know why I thought that was going to be a good idea, but I've decided against it. So the idea here, I mean, it's obvious enough, is I'm going to weld these guys together like this. See the bevels I've ground, and all of this is below grade, not grade, what am I trying to say? When I was designing where this joint was going, it was going into a place that I wouldn't have to do a lot of grinding. So any grinding I do into this weld will only be superficial. I added extra bits around the corners because I'm not quite sure what's happening at the corners, but I think everything gets scooped out, you know, to a curve, so it doesn't matter too much. But that's why it's all blobby. Also, that and this guy is my old cranky MIG welder back. It, you know, sticks and doesn't fire, and the lead chokes up inexplicably sometimes. Hopefully that was a little bit faster than just grinding that straight out of the... Where are those lumps I cut out? Faster than it would have been to grind this down to that. So now that we have this low-res version of the bony shape med, we can start cutting and grinding and smoothing it out to turn it more into the bone type shape it's supposed to actually be. So I'm going to start by cutting bits off the back to get this shape, because that'll give me a reference for what I'm supposed to be doing for the other sides. So this shape is the... on the back of this guy, was just one little hump that defied making this guy as just a straight cylinder type creature. So that was just welding on like a slightly raised part that I can smooth out and make part of the whole... Oh, this is still slightly too hot. So that's the horn part on the back. Put in, it'll sit like that of an angle on the actual sword. But yeah, that's what I had to do to get this guy made out of a single solid piece. Well, 3 solid pieces. Oh, too hot to hold. So that's both of them done. Certainly took a while. I shudder to think how long it would have taken if I'd stuck to my original plan. But as you can see, the transition is... You'd have to be an awful grumpy Gus to complain about that. So what I'm trying to make here is the transition piece from the skull and the handle, which is a lump of something thicker than the actual handle's made out of, which is, you know, one of these bits that I didn't use for doing the side bones. The guard, the cross guard, I guess you'd call it. Now, the math on it is a little trickier. If this was the narrow point, then the math would be very easy. But I'm going to have another look at this and see that have I marked it wrong. Turned out I had marked it wrong. This guy too gets all rounded off on our organic looking. So it's not vital. Oh, well, these marks confuse each other. No, it should be okay. I should be able to tell them apart. So that's the shape carved out. There was quite a lot of grinding to go from... I still have the other one that I cut off. Go from this to that. That outer edge was material consciously lost. This edge is smaller than that, but this was close enough. It was a great advantage to start from the hex. And then the handle has a hex shape too, but it's a different material. It's more like the... I think it's 1.5 I'm making it from. So what we're doing now is the handle of the sword. The middle part, this where I have the line, is 1/4 inch deeper than the head. So I'm going to try and use a large thin cutting disc to just take a weird sliver out before I go at it with the you know, all my sanding discs and stuff to try and turn it into a nice curve. So now that the basic shape is cut out, the next thing to do is I cut this from the template, short side, long side, so it goes the other way. And that just has to be made more into a curve like this guy. Still too hot to touch. See the bar it came out of. So I nearly squished this guy on the way back to my house to get my camera. Now, I'm sure to all the Americans in the house this is no big deal, but as an Irish person, the idea of nearly throttling on a snake is a crazy fantasy animal that you don't get in the real life. I've seen them out and about here before, but I've never been close enough to one to catch it. Whoa, I let him go just to see what happened because it looked like he wanted to explore my arm. And then I'm trying not to squish him. Oh, buddy, he's flexing like crazy. I assumed they would have told me if there was like poisonous snakes. He certainly hasn't tried to bite me. Here, we'll put you down here. Off you go. There he goes. Crazy American fantasy animals. So now this is the start of the weird little crown on the back of the handle. This part is flared out, but I'm going to make it out of a relatively heavy wall pipe and then heat it up. So, it looks like it has to flare out more. I should have made sure I had one of these handy before I started hammering things. But yeah. Yow! If that's the diameter, holy moly, that has to flare out even more. So I'll heat it up again. Okay, that's close enough. There we go. So I picked these 2 points to tack because that's where this ring was making good contact with this guy. So I'm going to take the heat, make it so it's actually making good contact all the way around. Just I don't like, I mean it's not much of a gap, but I don't like any gap. And then when I've done that I can attach this guy to the back. maybe since these points are thin, it won't need much encouragement. Okay, I don't think you're going to get much better than that. See, the spike came out a bit, but after I tack it, I can push it back this way with some gentle hammer love. A lot of heat in there. It's hard little welds to reach. I'd be very surprised if those spikes are going to need to adjustments. That's bounded on there in a irremovable fashion. Just using the air to blow out the dust. It's a hard weld to clean out. The top of the handle also has like a big hexagonal ring. I tried to bend it out a 1/2 inch round bar, but these little corners, these sharp 60-degree corners, they were just disappearing, and it wasn't coming out in nice shape. It might have been actually better to just bend a round ring and then bash it a bit to be hex shaped. But I decided to just cut a solid out of 1/2 inch, and I'm going to just round off the outside of it. That way I don't have the problem of having to weld a center as well. Also, I'm going to drill a hole in the middle, and then once I have the hole drilled, I can plasma cut out a big space in the middle. That's such a distance. I was too far away, so those welds are probably... oh, they're not too bad. It's just the clamp was in the way. And this is just to get it positioned. I'm going to take it outside now, look at it, torture myself, see was it actually centered, etc, etc. So we have an imperfect hexagon on top of another imperfect hexagon. I'm trying to line them up as best I can. See which version of this is the closest to being good. I think it's this one. I think it's where I had it, because obviously I was messing around with it before I hit go on the camera to break the fourth wall. And this one I'm going to TIG weld, because this weld has to be ground back, because this is going to be a visible plate, and I can't hide it like I did the others. In the old days I would have just MIG welded too, but it'll mess up a lot of stuff if there's too much spatter and stuff. Yeah, big weld. This is also a thing you should know already, but if you're welding something with little spikes, put the earth somewhere closer to the weld than just on the table. Best case scenario is if I left the earth on the table, it would fuse at the points, but it could completely melt them out because they're so pointy, depending on how much heat I poured into this guy. It's an easy mistake to make if you're moving too fast. I'll lay it down to do the full welds. There it is, all lumpy bumpy, carved out of round rods. Yeah. Ah! Come on, it's always hard to do one-handed. I'm less clumsy when I have both hands, honest. This light, because it's only a 1/4 inch. Oh no, you can see the shapes. I was worried that the things I was grinding on the surface were a little bit too shallow. This little coccyx type bit. Coccyx is a good word. You can say it in public, and people can't tell you to not say it. These are for the clavicles on the sword, you know, the bit just above the ribcage, in between the ribcage and the skull. When you're bending something with heat around a form, it's very important to just keep the heat on the point where it's actually touching the form, where it's not yet bent. If you start heating it up here and bend it and then try to match it, it goes all pear-shaped and it'll be a nightmare. You'll have to hammer it a lot. But if you just heat it at the exact point where it's touching the form all the way along, you can just do it without having to hammer anything. So what I did here was, so this curve that I bent that guy around was this thing, obviously, and I didn't film me doing the next part, but it was so you have this, starts down here on the flat bit. Is this the right one? So it starts down here like this and follows this curve this away, but then it has all these bends, and so then I set up this guy, because it turns out that all the angles this guy takes are very close to each other, and then holding it at 90 degrees I bent it in the other direction. Hang on, which one? I'm getting confused now. That's the curve that away, and then you can see the bends were in the other 90 degrees to that. I have to do a similar thing down here now. That's what this guy chalked into here. Oh, you can barely see that, but I've chalked a second one in here for this. Hay fever, Mother Nature trying to murder me. So now that we have all of the clavicles, and then whatever you'd call these guys down here, the lower, smaller ones. Hang on. There we go, like this. They go underneath this guy. This guy goes in here, and then these guys go on top like that, for whatever reason. Now that we have all these ones done, the last physical component of the sword to make before we start welding, just doing a huge amount of welding, is the horns. So for the horns, what I'm going to do is I've made these little bits and we're going to stick them in the drill and do old-fashioned. I was looking for anything that had it on it. This was the only scrap of paper I found that had the horn. They're actually, I think, smaller than the horns I put on Rebellion last time. They're smaller and thicker than the ones I put on the last version of Rebellion I made. Not sure that I prefer the small thick horns versus the long, more cruel looking ones, but this is what we're doing this time. So we're going to lock this in the drill and attack it with an angle grinder with a sanding pad. So what I'm going to try and do now is the spike, the horn isn't straight, it's got a curve to it. So I want to try and put a bit of a curve on the horn, but without marring it too much. If I get it very, very hot and hit it with wood, I want to see can I actually bend it that way. Put most of the heat into the bottom of it, because the bottom of it's going to be the hardest part to bend. That's getting a bend on it. There we go, that works. So this is why I wanted to use the wood instead of the hammer to do that little bit of shaping, because after spinning it in the drill, the surface of this guy is so smooth that I didn't want to lose that smooth surface. You know, like if it had all the hammer dings in it. You can see the curve it's got compared to the one. I'm going to chop this guy off and swap them out. But I wanted to just mark where, theoretically, the length of this guy. See, it's like a little short, stocky demon horn. It's not a big, long one like I did last time. Trying to work out where to put the holes for the horns. They're in a different... Looking closely at the template, they're not actually... If I was doing it myself, I'd probably do them much lower down and like kind of... Yeah, actually I'm not going to do it now, but it'd be worth looking at where I put them last time. Looking at the template, they're actually much higher up than I think is natural. This template is obviously based on the picture I had of the in-game model. But yeah, I guess that's where I'm going to do it. And the other thing is, like, just see, does that interfere with where I'm going to weld the handle on? Because that was another possibility. That just some feature of the art I was working on didn't actually make sense. Oh, that's a weird bug. Ooh. What are you? Show me, show me, show me, show me. You have very strange wings. I'm going to put you outside. Whoa. I'm going to put you outside. Drilling a hole onto the front of a curved thing like this is kind of difficult. I managed to hit the crosshairs. And then the bigger ones now I can go through from the other side, which is much easier, drill from the inside. See the blue discoloration around the horn. The last thing I wanted to risk was getting the back of this guy too hot, having bleed through, having some of the weld on the back. I don't know, can you see? Oh yeah, like this horrible pimply looking thing here. That was weld on the front getting too hot and melting through. But if it had happened around here, It would have been a nightmare to clean up in here. So that's why I was doing it in little zaps, joining the relatively thick 1/2 inch to the thinner 1/8 inch. Yeah. So an unusual feature of the Rebellion is it's got the horned skull with the big open mouth on one side. See, that's where I welded in the jawbone, and the more closed mouth with no horns on the other side. And wasn't there a thing? There was something about like Rebellion waking up or Rebellion going into super mode, and that's when the skull went from not having horns to having horns. But on the actual 3D model, it was just two different sides of the same model, and I think, you know, I'm not sure how they squared it. Like, it was just like, it was a, you know, it was just the 3D guy was like, oh, I'll just model it this way, and when it goes into super mode, just flip the 3D model around or something. Because it always has the two skulls, if you look at it closely, the two faces either side. There's what the skulls looked like the first time I made them. So the idea here is these clavicles coming down, the things I twisted and bent, I would like to join them. They're going to be joined to the sword here, but I'd like also to join them to the ribcage, but from underneath, because it'll be a cleaner join. But to do that, I can't weld it from underneath when it's on the sword itself. I have to set up some sort of thing so that I can tack the rib cages down to something, do the welds I need to do, and then get the rib cage back up off. Set up this jig. I need to get it off here. I left a small gap so I could weld in and then grind back without it interfering with the strength of the weld. But the problem is it's fused to the table now. Let's see. There we go. I have to look at this for a while. Something, I think this needs to go over a bit or something. So with the completion of these bits, that's the last bit of fabrication. Everything else, all the parts are made. The two rib cages, two skulls, the two arm bones for guards, the handle itself, and the blade is all sharpened. The last thing is to join all of this stuff to that. That'll be all of tomorrow and possibly the next day. So what's going on here is this is the base plate underneath the ribs and the bones and such. I shouldn't have touched that with my bare hand. And I was going to darken it anyway, but I was thinking it might be an idea to darken it using the cold blue before I start welding stuff to it. I'll probably have to touch it up once all the welding's done. Whoop. On a little while to do its thing, and then wash it off and stuff. You can see the reflection of the tree. Now that it's been on for a while, I'm going to wash it off and dry it and oil it. No, actually, not oil it. That might cause problems. I can't oil it yet until I do all the welding. Because, like I've said many times before, the oil messes up the... messes it up something awful. Now. Blip, 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 blip. Okay, so I nipped off a little bit of this guy and threw it in the hole. I only want a little bit of a join. I don't want to do the full weld until I get everything positioned. I have to sit such that I don't disturb that clamp. Purposely took all my markings off the surface so that I wouldn't bake it onto the surface, bake the Sharpie onto the surface. But hopefully I can get a zap in there. Who knows, the acetone might be just as messy. The acetone will boil out of these edges now as I go to weld that. Double check. Yeah, I got it. Just gotta hold that there in place. Light tacks here at the back so we can get this guy positioned properly, or rather finish off positioning it properly. As per usual, there's no good, these organic ones, there's no good place to measure from. That was the idea of putting the marking out the thing underneath, was that it would help line things up. An inch up above. I would be standing where the camera is. Yeah, it's an inch. Gonna do these ones with the MIG. The soot works as an anti-spatter, kinda. I'm just trying to keep the mess down as I do these welds. I need a toothbrush or something to wipe out the area. Wipe out the area I'm actually aiming for without making too much of a mess. There we go. So if that's secured, flip it, do the same the other side. I can feel, I can see this on the camera, but I can't really feel it with my finger, so that'll probably, after you see I have to re-blacken these two huge areas I have to take out to, you know, smooth it all in. Oh man. Some other larger point I was going to make. Oh yeah, the soot works great. I mean, there was no spatter on basically any of the things I didn't want spatter to be on. So mar from where the clamp was as well. Okay, that'll do. What's the balance level? There we go. Welded along these edges here. So I've spent hours setting this up. We have this was a very hard shape to make level. You know, there's no, but the only thing on it for a reference is this running down the side is a straight line. So I found a thickness of stuff that you could place here and brace it so that this line was level, and then these wooden blocks underneath the sword are all of a height such that you can yeah, it's all on the same, this center line matches up with the center line of this plate, but it's just a very strange shape to try and match up. And then this has a center point that's equidistant to that center point and this center point, and but like this was ground and lumpy bumpy, this was ground and lumpy bumpy, and this was ground and lumpy bumpy. If you look down the sword it looks okay, but you can't even look down it like you normally do because the rib cage is in the way. So torturing myself looking at this, making sure everything's in the right place. But I think we got it. I think finally it's ready that I can tack the handle into position. It's strange how, I mean, yeah, the welding is always short. It's the getting everything ready to go is the hard part. You want to take that off, look at it. Now I'm filming sideways, but I'm also looking sideways, so it's okay. I'm trying to figure out, just by looking at it, does it pass a visual test as well as a measurement test? You know? It's hard to see because it's buried in weld now, but as well as welding it straight across, here's this one's still hot. I added in a wedge piece just to give it extra support between that and the plate, you know, because there's a lot of weight on this guy, just so that it wouldn't that there's some transition between the 1.25 inches and the 1/4 inch, you know. So now after getting the handle in, oh, you can see the mark on it, so I wouldn't forget which side I picked. I just tacked the skull in where it's going. I wish the the soot that I used as the anti-spatter, it's a very, very dark, but it doesn't actually stay. Like in here, if I put my finger in there and rubbed it, you know. I'm going to go around the outside here. I need to weld the skull in all around the outside, across here, and grind back. And then, other than some cleanup, we're done. That's it all welded in. It's a messy, lumpy weld because I was trying to add all the material, and there was a gap because the skull is tilted up the way, because I wanted the jaw to be more or less level with this guy, to create like a, you know, that this is a continuous plane. So to fill in a fairly substantial gap all around the edge here. And then this guy had a huge big gap because it was where the, not a huge big gap, huge for the TIG welder, would have been nothing for the MIG welder, but I can't use the MIG welder in here because cleaning up the spatter would have been more work. I would have been very lucky to get, like, to do the suck trick and get away with this with the MIG welder. So TIG, 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 TIG. Woo. Whoop. Random. It's WD-4. It's WD-40 now, so you know, it's just got random bits of black, gunky stuff where the WD-40 was a little bit thick. You know, there's something in there. Dust and stuff. But that's it done. Representing 7 years of progress over the last one. I might throw in some shots of the last one if I can find anything here. And oh, that's my wife and kids back. Hello!
We have French fries for you.
That's great, I'll be in a minute.
Okay. We have pizza. Pizza!
Oh. But there we go. It's heavier than the last one I made, because on the last one I made, these guys were hollow. I think the handle was solid, but the arms were hollow, and these guys were made out of skinnier material, because I was bending everything cold. It might be closer to 45 pounds than it is to 35 pounds. Whoa! But there it is. I should get a guy dressed as Dante to swing it for the destruction video. Don't know if we'll be able to find one though on short notice. Dante, he had like a white hair, red trench coat, a leather bare chest but with a brown leather strap across his nipples. I should put up flyers. Wanted. Young man, young fit looking man with red trench coat and leather strap across nipples, wanted to hold Irishman's giant sword. I'll stick some posters up down the bus station. it.
Like the dad.
What are you helping him by doing?
He's drying the parts. I'm washing the weird stuff off them.
Vinegar. It's vinegar. Dry, 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 dry.
I already. There's no pieces left to dry. The trick is to put it in the sunlight. Then we'll dry the pieces you didn't get.
Very good.